less than 2 weeks away from the second Democratic debate in Detroit, and one of the candidates is turning the spotlight to an issue that does not get a lot of attention from politicians: male circumcision. Former tech executive Andrew Yang is speaking out against it, saying that the evidence of it being healthy for babies is questionable, and he says history will be on the side of parents who opt out of that elective surgery. Even in Israel, you may be surprised to know some politicians agree with that sentiment, that circumcision should not be forced on any baby because they cannot consent. With us now in Israel, well, of course, this issue touches on the heart of social and religious circles. With me in studio is Rani Kasher. He is the head of Ben Shalem, an anti-circumcision organization, also the author of a book on this very issue titled, appropriately enough, Second Thoughts on Circumcision. Also with me, Rabbi Hayim Leiter. He is the founder of Brית, also a mohel, which Jewish religious leader. They perform circumcision on Jewish babies in a religious ritual that dates back thousands of years. Typically, it's done 8 days after the birth of a male baby. Let me start with you, Rabbi. In your mind, some people now say it's just inhumane. I don't want to talk about the health benefits, it's good or bad. It's just inhumane to do this to a crying 8-day-old baby. It's not right. How do you respond to that very simple argument?
It's a great argument. It's a good debate to have, but the way I feel is this. Number one, we have, over the majority of the world, a declining birth rate. In most of the world, outside of Israel, actually. And one of the reasons for this declining birth rate is that people aren't really looking at the long-term goal here. They're thinking about what's best for me, how much money can I have in my bank account, and then the number of children tend to stay a bit low. And so the problem is that they're not looking at that long game. And the long game, if you will, is what the Jewish people are working on, right? Brit Milah is a connection to something that's become way before us and will, God willing, be something that's part of us well after us. And the idea is that, yes, when you look at the individual act at that moment, the baby is crying, there is some pain, but thank God the baby forgets very quickly and moves on from that issue. And then we have something which has the continuity of the Jewish people continuing.
Ron, your response to that point: this is something that's painful, but it's brief, it's relatively minor, and the baby moves on.
Well, first of all, it's not minor at all, because you take off a great deal of the skin of the penis, and all the sexual relationship changing after you take out the foreskin. But I think it's much deeper. If it's so deep, if it's so important, why shouldn't the man do it by himself? I mean, for example, I am a secular and I'm atheist, and I'm very angry of my parents that cut my penis. Yeah. And for me, there is no God, there is no any connection. I'm a Jew, and I think today there are a lot of intact boys and men in Israel that are without brit, and they are Jewish the same as everybody because they don't serve the Shabbat, and they don't do anything.
Before we turn to the health benefits of this or not, I want to just on the spiritual and religious point. What about Ron's point there, that if this is a covenant with God, it sustains the Jewish people, it could be done later. You don't have to have a baby who has no autonomy of his own body to force them to do this. Why can't it be done, if you want, at a later date? It'd be more meaningful if you do it as an adult, perhaps.
Well, right there I'm going to strike at the more meaningful piece. By definition, a Brit Milah is 8 days. Right? After that point, it is a medical procedure, okay? Now, there are reasons that we push off Brit Milah, right? If someone is ill, right? If you have to wait for any types of reasons. But all in all, the goal is 8 days. That's why it pushes off Shabbat, right? We would not do any cutting. We would not do anything like that on Shabbat normally, right? We refrain from all sorts of things like that. But because it's the 8th day, it pushes off Shabbat and holidays.
Does religious scholars, Rambam, the ancient rabbis, the interpretation of why this is so necessary, is it applicable to this day and age?
So you're saying that you don't...
I'm asking, what is the
ancient... Do I think that it's inapplicable what they're...
No. Do you think that it still resonates to this day? These ancient...
I think that depends on who you ask, number one, right? Obviously, if you're going to ask people who don't have much connection, and I don't mean any disrespect to anyone who doesn't have connection to the Shabbat and the holidays and the laws, it's not going to be as meaningful for them, right? But at the same token, I want to respond to what Rani was saying a second ago, right? The amount of skin that's taken off is very minute, and number two, all the documentation that comes out of the anti-circumcision movement claims that there are 20,000 nerve endings that are lost. It's a grossly over-exaggerated number. They took a study in 1932, and they said one baby was studied, 1 square centimeter, and he said there were 212 nerve endings there. They multiplied it, and I think not correctly, and the number should be more like 19.
Ronnie, I know you want to jump in here. Just the
this is not the argument. I think no, it's not the argument. First of all, it's very small amount of skin because it's a baby of 8 days. But when you calculate the skin when the man is grown up, you are talking about this size of skin. This is a double layer skin, and it's not just the nerve ends. It's also all the mechanism of the sexual relationship is changing. So it's not minor at all, and you can see in all over the world, all the circumcisions are from traditional or religious reason.
Rani,
No one in the world does circumcision because of medical reason.
But in the U.S., it's about 70%. In the world, it's about less than a third. But in America, among secular atheists, families, among Christians...
It's not for medical reason, because no medical organization in the world, and including in the state, recommend routine circumcision.
There's an argument, and now we're hearing from U.S. politicians, presidential candidates are weighing in on circumcision. Israeli politicians are weighing in on circumcision. Some say it's healthy for the baby, for cleanliness and for preventing disease as adults. Ronnie, go real quick.
But if no medical organization recommend a routine circumcision for healthy babies, so why should we do it?
The American Association of Pediatrics says that its benefits outweigh its risk by 100 to 1. It prevents UTI infections, it prevents penile cancer, it prevents cervical cancer.
But it doesn't recommend to do it for healthy.
Cervical cancer in the partner, it reduces the risk of STDs, HIV by 60%. That's why it's being done all over Africa.
But the baby doesn't have risk of transmitting HIV. They're not having sex.
But later in life, it's like a vaccination, right? You do it now so that later on they don't have this issue.
But it's only in the state. In all over the world, nobody thinks like this. It's only in the United States. So why the Americans are so clever? It's not logical. I'm sorry.
I want to ask you about Israel, though. Socially, especially in this country, it's such an important part. As you mentioned before, and you're secular and even an atheist, but it's everyone. It's part of what makes Israel.
Yeah, mostly everyone.
Yeah.
Well, I have five boys. 2 of them, the oldest, are circumcised, and 3 of them are intact. The big one is almost 21. He's going to the army. Now it's near Gaza. No problem at all. Kids can manage with their foreskin in Israel. It's no problem at all. It's only some myth that it's problem for them.
Rabbi, are you surprised, does it bother you that this is becoming kind of a public issue? Politicians weighing in, speaking about possibly changing laws in some countries in Europe, or changing the... Do you think that there's an element here on infringing on religious
I think 100% it's an infringement on religious rights. I think that just as I wouldn't hold any of your children down and try to circumcise them, God forbid that, I wouldn't try to force me not to be able to do it, right? It should be a choice that we're all given. There's no doubt about that.
Well, the question is, what about girls? Why boys can be cut and girls
it's
the same reason and the same consequence, and I think the boys must be equal.
We have to leave it here because we're coming out on a break, an important discussion and a topic that is becoming once again in the forefront of the public eye. I want to thank our guest, Rani Kasher, again, author of the book Second Thoughts on Circumcision. Look at that. A nice handshake to end the debate that we have to end here. Rabbi Leiter, founder of Bereit, and a mohel himself. Thank you both so much for the discussion. It's back in the international spotlight in Europe and in America. We appreciate you guys stopping by.